and also former chairman is here. I am little conscious about the plantation you have said, especially in the tailment area. And in my observation, if you talk about the Bermo to Rajarappa, that area, the plantation and coverage is not adequate. That much I can say. Second point, near Ramgarh, some of the washeries are making the Damodar River, it's a perennial river. In terms of ISO 14,000, the perennial point of river is, there are many sources where the pollutions are being dropped. Number three, if you talk about the RS data, remote sensing data, I don't know what scale you have used. If I take about the topo sheet of 1:50,000 data, there is no such canopy cover before it was made. And lastly, I do not agree that fly ash can act as a soil. There are a lot of, after lunch, I can talk to you. Thank you.
I think the good idea would be if you restrict the questions to questions.
Your first question, it is not that 73 million trees planted by coal industry is not maybe some subsidies more, subsidies less. It's okay. Subsidy may be good and subsidy. See, MCL and SCCL and MCL, they are this leading area. So now last to the points, the fly ash is absolutely, you're technically totally wrong. Fly ash is basically ash. It is a soil. It has been converted. You please just listen to me. Please listen to me. You go to Dadri.
You kindly tell the place where he can go and see.
You go to Dadri, you see there.
That's right. That's a good
And
idea.
when you challenge the figure of the reclamations, it is by satellite figure.
Okay, the next question. Next question to the next speaker.
Dr. Krom, it's a good decision of Germany that they don't want nuclear power. But I would like to know if your coal supply is shrinking, and if you are not going for nuclear power, so in 20 or 30 years, what will be the power scenario? Is it solar, or how are you doing the power scenario?
Yes. Well, firstly, remember that we are really going for renewable energies. So the scenario for 2050 is that 80% of the electricity is coming from renewables. Now, the other part is what are we doing until then? We are already importing most of our coal. So we feel that there is no harm on importing the coal because anyway it's much cheaper. And then the other thing is that given the volatility of the renewable energies, that gas is increasingly also attractive because gas is much easier to sort of regulate and follow the changes in the load.
Renewable is solar or wind?
There's a mix of that. We are actually mixing solar and wind and a little bit of biomass as well from waste.
80%.
That will be 80% of our electricity in 2050, yes.
In how many years?
It will be in the year 2050s. It will be, again, yes, in 7 years it will be 35%. In 2020 we will have 35% of our electricity from renewables, and in 2050 it will be 80 years.
Any questions to the other speakers?
Integrating the hybrid large-scale power generation.
See, ultimately, I think what is good thing about the proton exchange membrane fuel cell, you can have a kilowatt to multi-megawatt fuel cell, both capabilities available in the proton exchange membrane fuel cell. So it's very easy because I don't see just the requirement also for the multi-megawatt, just a distribution plant, because like give an example of a telecom tower, countries like Japan, where power is not a problem, it has become mandatory that you have to have telecommunication up and running under all emergency situation. Take an example of Uttarakhand. You are not able to reach people because even if you have a power available there, if the telecom doesn't run, it's a problem. Or any emergency kind of a system. So you need backup power system. So kilowatt scale. And then obviously the other side is the distributed generation and the power generations, which is multi-megawatt. Proton exchange membrane fuel cell can give you that. What you are talking about is only can be megawatt, cannot be kilowatt, and we can talk offline why.
So the last question for Mr. Shen.
Mr. Goyal, good afternoon.
Yeah.
The product that you have mentioned, shall I have to assume that it's meant for low capacity utilization, number one? Number two, what are the risk factors involved?
So the system I mentioned, it is a 2.5 and a 5 kilowatt can be put in parallel. You can have 15 kilowatt and I given an example even 100 kilowatt. The liquid methanol right now what we have is up to 15 kilowatt we can give. No risk factor, we have already deployed 4,000 systems around the world. If I talk specifically on telecom tower, out of the top 10 telecom operators in the world, 5 are already our customer. Idea Solar is our customer. I'm in fact coming from Guwahati. The top 2 telecom operators is also going for this.
That's the last question. Or we close it.
Thank you. May we request Mr. Partha Bhattacharya to please present mementos to our speakers. May we request Mr. Arun Kumar Mukherjee to please present a memento to Mr. Bhattacharya. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are changing over to our valedictory session. We have Dr. Vikas Sinha and Mr. Debi Mukherjee with us. May I request Dr. Sinha and Mr. Mukherjee to please come to the dais. My colleagues from the chamber is quickly setting up the head table. And ladies and gentlemen, you are requested to please be seated so that we can start the session. Take his seat. Mr. Mukherjee, shall we begin the session?
Yes, please. Shall I?
Yes. You take it easy.
Dr. Sinha has given us a very clear signal. He is hungry and he doesn't want any speech from me. I shall oblige you, sir. We are indeed honored that we have a person of his eminence delivering the valedictory address of the Energy Conclave. Just a few expectations from my side, which I hope Dr. Sinha will touch upon during his address, because we come right to the end of the Energy Conclave 2013, and we need to draw up a scorecard. So therefore, we would like you, sir, you are a scientist of great eminence, so I'm sure you will talk about nuclear power a little bit, whether that's a viable option, whether it should be considered at all, and how it should be considered. And whilst you talk about that, please take the perspective of a common man, because perception is very important in the use of nuclear power, especially from radioactive angle radiation and nuclear waste from a health and safety perspective. Maybe we do understand the ideas of greater supply of energy and the shortfall that is there, but let us also be conscious of the fact that we need to give access to about 30% of India's population to energy. So whether we take a top-down view, whether we take a bottom-up approach, what is the road ahead in terms of the future of power in India? That's the theme of the last session, and please draw up a scorecard and give us your guidance. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Right. Mr. Mukherjee, ladies and gentlemen, I have nothing very much to tell you about coal or steel. In fact, I am a little tired of being saturated of coal and steel. Clearly, we have got to get rid of both coal and steel. So much has been said by so many for so many years about climate change and the sustainable energy that it's almost become a boring subject. But clearly, if you look at the world scenario, I recall when I got interested in this area about 10, 12 years ago, looking at people's eyes and faces and body language in the audience, they surely thought this is merely a mad scientist campaign. But over the years, particularly in the Western world, climate change and energy and greenhouse effect have become a household concept more so than the politicians. It took a lot of time to percolate down, but there is a clear consciousness about the need to do something to this earth that we live in. My talk would be very general, and as Mr. Mukherjee very kindly suggested, I will try to touch upon a number of issues, but go through very fast, because time is running out. And I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, I will not go into details of how many megawatt, how many kilotons, and so on and so forth. 21st century challenges: minerals, food production, conflict and terrorism, water resource, energy security and supply, health and development, and ecosystem. If you look at the whole history of the world, during the billions of years of our planet's existence, its climate has varied a lot. At times, the entire planet may have been wholly or mostly enveloped by snow and ice, whilst at other times, tropical animals inhabited the polar regimes. Even in the roughly 100,000 years of Homo sapiens' tenancy on this planet, ice ages have come and gone, and followed by ice age there is huge increase in temperature. But the most recent 8,000 years or so, since the beginning of agriculture, and the first cities, however, have been unusually steady. A point that stares at our face, but we choose to ignore because it's convenient to ignore. Energy facts. I just want to show you that the USA consumes about twice the UK and about 50 times to Bangladesh. World, it distracts you. I'm very sorry. World energy use expected to go 50% by 2030. 80% is generated by burning fossil fuels, leading to greenhouse effect and change in temperature, global temperature. But somehow human civilization has assumed a criterion called Human Development Index, which is roughly life expectancy at birth, adult literacy and school enrollment, GNP per person, and primary energy demand per person. The King of Bhutan has introduced another criterion which is very difficult to quantify, that is human happiness, whatever that is. You see here total population of the world in billions, how it goes up. A median about quite high. Let's not go into details. Most remarkable phenomenon in the world at large is the growth in the size of middle class. And India right now is experiencing, wonderfully speaking, a tremendous growth in middle class. 1.8 billion middle class consumers today. 3 billion more middle class consumers expected by 2030. And 90% of that comes from Asia, China and India in particular. So quite simply, the consumption of a middle-class family, because of the sheer number, would go on increasing as you go along with time. This is a simple thing, probably you know most of it, that the hydro, nuclear, gas, coal, oil, this is the sort of basic source of energy. And as I said, 80% is generated by burning fossil fuel. This is the same thing. And somebody was talking about renewable energy and claiming, our German friend, the renewable energy would control 75% of Germans' requirement for electricity. I don't think it's here, unfortunately, but I do know from my friends in Germany that most of the electricity in Germany is imported from France and Czechoslovakia. It is my contention that every source of energy has to be used judiciously if you want to progress in this world. Wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, I'll touch upon. We're just embarking ourselves in a geothermal energy which has scored a big zero in India so far. Hydropower and, of course, renewable, about 16%. And nuclear, although we talk about nuclear quite a bit, but nuclear still remains below 3% in our country. Environmental impact of fossil fuel-based power plant, which is known, CO2 emission, rise in global mean temperature, and one point, I don't know whether it has been touched upon, rise in sea level, which is very, very crucial for the place we live in, which is called Calcutta. We don't think about it, but the Bay of Bengal is rising because the snow caps in the Arctic is melting like mad. And please remember, what is happening in the Arctic has some connection in Bay of Bengal, because the water comes through and all the oceans are connected, can't escape. There is a saying in our sort of world circuit, a Saudi saying, my father rode a camel, I drive a car, and my son flies a plane. And his son probably will end up riding a camel again. And it is a stark reality which may easily happen once there is a clamping on the business of fossil fuel. I will show some negative pictures to be alert and aware what you are not seeing in our eyes and thinking in our head. Muir Glacier, Southeast Alaska, 1941, and then you see August 2004, entire ice has melted, now become water, and that water gushes through to the plain. This is the Himalayan glacier, which is very familiar to us. You can compare, I don't have to spend any time, 1978 to 2004. I happen to be near the similar region when this tremendous torrential rain that happened, and it is actually quite frightening. And that is because the so-called ice cap being melting, they can't hold back certain flow of water and steam coming out of the melting of ice. Just a quick remark that global temperature rise by a few degrees is a lot. I mean, temperature rising in a city by 5 degrees, 6 degrees. My friend Mr. Devnath writes an article next day in the newspapers, which you read very carefully, because we who live in Bengal are very sensitive to temperature. And whether it rains, whether it doesn't rain, whether it's too cold or it's too hot. But the fact is, globally, a slight increase in temperature leads to some devastating effect. Just अरे भाई थोड़ा चुप करो ना यार. Uppsala Glacier, Patagonia, 1928. Some people can't keep quiet, you know. They have to talk. And that's also a polluting factor. It bothers your ears and hearing. Same thing, Uppsala Glacier, 2004. This is a very interesting slide to my mind. The x-axis is not temperature, it's oxygen 18. And I'm not going to bore you with details again, please. If the thing is very high, which is the case here, that means it's extremely cold. And that's the scientific idea. Please believe me. And I'm gray here enough to please trust me. So you see, this is about 60 million years ago that the temperature is extremely cold. And there was a slush, ice slush on whole Earth. And slowly there was an ice age around about this time. Let's not worry about it. And slowly the temperature is increasing over the years as the graph goes down. This is a graph of sea level and temperature measurement. Global temperature, say, for some time is increasing and it's gone to very high level now, and same with sea level, as you can see. So it's connected to what you call in science the nonlinear effect. Namely, the more the global temperature increases, more the ice melts, more the sea level rises, sea gets heated up because most of the world is sea, and then, of course, that increases the temperature again. CO2 emissions and GDP per capita, as expected, USA is at the top, but if you multiply by the number of persons, still USA is the top. In short, without going into a great deal of controversy, USA is the most significant or highest consumer or guzzler of fossil fuel, and actually so-called responsible for CO2 emission and greenhouse effect. And please don't ignore that what is happening in USA has no effect on us. This is all connected, as it were. And we make a mistake. The world is connected, so if the whole temperature business goes up in USA and CO2 emission goes up in USA, it does have an effect all over the world. It's not surprising, because most human beings want to shut their mind and eyes to the rest of the world and be happy. But the state of happiness is rather limited, as you see towards the end of my talk. This is the CO2 emissions, coal maximum 43%. I'm sorry, I can't help it actually. And gas and other things is there, oil also similarly responsible, but you can't do anything about it. 29,381 million tons of CO2 is coming out from the earth. This is the slow and steady rise of CO2 concentration, which has now come up to about 390 ppm, whatever the ppm measure is. And the limit is 550, and you shall see in a minute that is the maximum we can afford, but to control that on carbon capping is a very expensive proposition. Per capita carbon dioxide emission, as usual, the United States is the highest. Then comes Europe, and whatever we talk about, India is extremely small so far, 1.38%. The rise in emissions were 2,100, and if business as usual, it goes through exponentially. So you have to stabilize it, as I said just now, 550 ppm or 450 ppm, and how we do it. This is a picture which appeals to me, because probably oil production has already tipped for many reasons. The demand is going up. If US attacks Syria tomorrow, which is entirely likely, the entire oil prices go up in India as well. And the fact is that eventually human being to survive, as you shall see later, the last discussion point, we have to develop new ingenious method to actually get rid of carbon dioxide as much as possible. Conventional oil supply demand, and the forecast is that blue line, and volume of conventional oil discovered is that. So there will be a crossover, as it were, as you go along to the future. My friend Sir David King, from whom I have borrowed some slides, is the British advisor on climate change and science advisor of Tony Blair. He gave me this slide something happens about that time, where there is suddenly a very large increase in our demand of crude oil. Crude oil, to me, is an interesting sort of symbol of prosperity. That's a contradiction. It's not. Because when I was a kid, every house had a maximum one car. Most people didn't. And when I went to UK to study, most houses didn't have a car. Now, middle-class families in the United Kingdom, a family of 4 has 4 cars. And just in case one car breaks down, might as well have one more. But don't forget, each car is consuming so much of petrol. And that is supply from the crude oil. So it's a vicious circle that goes on in the world. To make you prosper is to make you suffer in the long run. Few disturbing facts from Greenland last summer. 550 billion tons of melted ice and 15% than average summer melt, beating even 2005 record. The surface ice loss was 12% more than 2005. We are not aware of this kind of loss in the last 300 years. You see, this is a very frightening picture. Just the red color means that danger of being submerged in the sea. Near Australia, one island has already submerged. And there are certain islands which already are suffering from this possible danger of going down. Near the western India, Kutch district, some story goes, the entire township is underneath. And archaeologists have discovered that. So this is not a fearfully frightful story. It has happened in the history of Earth and may indeed happen if we do not correct ourselves in our habits and outlook and our look to the future. And another thing which you have noticed probably, during the last 1.5 years, the average rate of earthquakes and great cloud bursts has increased quite a bit. And we suspect, and I don't have time to sustain this argument quantitatively, this could easily be because of increase of temperature and greenhouse effect. National action in climate change. And nobody believes this slide, which is also given by David King, Sir David King. You see, the American continent is almost yellow, which suggests no action has taken place there much. I would just mention to you, when President Obama has his first presidential candidate, when the revolution was made in American politics, he mentioned about climate change with a great deal of rhetoric. But the second campaign, he hardly mentioned about climate change because it's unfashionable. And the reason is, if you talk about climate change, the capitalistic growth of a nation goes down. And that's not the policy or outlook of the United States of America. But Rwanda, on the other hand, in Africa, has done a lot of business on not the greenhouse effect, but green technology in their own country. And I'm very proud, I don't know whether there's anybody from ITC, the Indian Tobacco Company has a